We're continuing with Chapter 3 in the statistics textbook, the histogram. In this video, we're going to go through the final section, which is a case study on selective breeding. In 1927, the psychologist Charles Spearman published The Abilities of Man, his theory of human intelligence. Briefly, Spearman held that test scores of intellectual abilities like reading, comprehension, arithmetic, or spatial perception were weighted sums of two independent components, a general intelligence factor, which Spearman called G, and an ability factor specific to each test. This theory attracted a great deal of attention. Okay, so Spearman is saying that test scores of intellectual abilities, reading comprehension, arithmetic, spatial perception, could be broken down as weighted sums of two independent components, a general intelligence factor and an ability factor specific to each test. That sounds pretty reasonable. So he's theorizing that a person's intelligence, that there's just a general overall intelligence factor, but then also people have sort of talents that are specific to certain cases. As part of his PhD research in the psychology department at Berkeley, Robert Tryon decided to check the theory on an animal population where it is simpler to control extraneous variables. Tryon used rats, which are easy to breed in the laboratory. To test their intelligence, he put the rats into a maze. When they ran the maze, the rats made errors by going into blind alleys. The test consisted of 19 runs through the maze. The animal's intelligence score was the total number of errors it made. So the bright rats are the ones with the low scores. The dulls are the ones with the high scores. Tryon started out with 142 rats, and the distribution of their intelligence scores is sketched in Figure 8. Okay, so this is for the 142 rats, I'm assuming. So each rat did 19 runs, and so I guess they averaged the amount of errors made, so the errors per run on average, and this is the distribution. Each rat in the histogram is its average errors per run. That's what's on the x-axis, and then the number of rats within that class interval is on the y-axis, or the percent per number of errors. And so this is just giving you a general overview of how the test scores are distributed. And it looks like the most common test score, the most common number of errors made, was about in that 35 to 40 range. The next step in the experiment was to breed for intelligence. In each generation, the maze bright rats, the ones making only a small number of errors, were bred with each other. Similarly, the maze dull animals with high scores were bred together. 7 generations later, Tryon had 85 rats in the maze bright strain and 68 in the maze dull strain. There was a clear separation in scores. Figure 9 shows the distribution of intelligence for the two groups, and the histograms barely overlap. In fact, Tryon went on with selective breeding past the 7th generation, but didn't get much more separation in scores. So here, the rats were bred for intelligence. The maze bright rats, the ones with, on average had lower scores, were bred together for, a certain number of generations, whereas the dull were bred together. The ones with the higher scores were bred together for a certain number of generations. And when you draw the histograms for the dull rats versus the bright rats, there's a clear separation in scores, right? So you don't have, and they barely overlap. So the idea is you don't have, in the dull group, there are potentially some cases where you have a dull group rat performing at the same level as a bright group rat, but overall, there's a clear separation. The two strains created by Tryon were used for many other experiments by the Berkeley Psychology Department. Generations later, rats from the maze bright population continued to outperform the dulls at maze running. So Tryon managed to breed for a mental ability, evidence that some mental abilities are at least in part genetically determined. What did the experiment say about Spearman's theory? Tryon found that the maze bright rats did no better than the maze dulls on other levels of animal intelligence, such as discriminating between geometric shapes or between intensities of light. This was evidence against Spearman's theory of a general intelligence factor, at least for rats. On the other hand, Tryon did find intriguing psychological differences between the two rat populations. The brights seemed to be unsociable introverts, well adjusted to life in the maze, but neurotic in their relationships with other rats. The dulls were quite the opposite. Well, okay, this conclusion here that it's saying this was evidence against Spearman's theory of a general intelligence factor. I'm not sure I would agree with that, because at the start of the experiment, you didn't make any kind of control for general intelligence versus non-general intelligence. So in other words, to me, you need to start with a big population of rats and then perform a bunch of tests to see which rats are in general more intelligent in general and which rats in general are less intelligent. You need to know that information first. Then you perform the selective breeding process when it comes to a specific task, the maze. That would have been the proper way to test Spearman's theory. And I say that because we see evidence, at least in my opinion, where a person doesn't seem to be the most intelligent, overall intelligent person, but they can do certain tasks like a genius. And so by starting this test, starting this test, just selecting rats randomly, you're going to have a mix of, for the rats that perform well at the maze, you're going to have a mix of rats that are in general intelligent, that can run, also do the maze well, and rats that in general maybe aren't the most intelligent, but they have the ability to do that maze very well. And so later, whenever you do a general intelligence test, you're not going to find any patterns. You're going to have some that seem to be in general more intelligent, some that don't. It's going to like even out. You're going to see no relation, no association. So I don't think Tryon's experiment works to debunk Spearman's theory, because there was no setup in the experiment that was accounting for general intelligence. In the setup of the experiment, yes, that he did tests at the end, but what about for the planning of the experiment? So that's the way I see it, but I'd love to hear your opinion. Drop a comment. Let me know what you think.